With me now to break this down from the Heritage Foundation, Joel Griffith. Joel, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me, Liz.
All right, this is a very somber segment, I think, when you look at these numbers, because I'm not sure that our politicians specifically who are imposing these lockdowns on us understand the gravity of the impacts of what everyday Americans are going to face 3 months hence, 6 months hence, a year hence.
I don't think many of us are really fully comprehending that unless we've actually been one of the unfortunate ones to lose a job. And that number is just simply astounding. We're going to have the jobless numbers come out later this week, and it looks as if we may have lost 20 million plus jobs just in April. We're talking about wiping out an entire 10-year record of jobs growth in 1 month. And like you mentioned, we can't put all the blame on this just on COVID. This has also been the result of actions on the part of many governors and many mayors that went far beyond what was warranted. And that is going to give us the highest unemployment rates that we've seen in our lifetimes, and actually in the lifetimes of many of our parents and grandparents, going back to the Great Depression.
And it just, I mean, it makes me sick to my stomach to read some of these numbers. Because, like I said, these numbers don't even count gig workers and casual workers and people who've just given up hope of looking for a different job. It's absolutely horrible. The New York Times says that more than 40%, 4 out of every 10 of our nation's 30 million small businesses could close permanently in the next 6 months. I'm speechless when I look at this because of, I mean, small businesses are the backbone of the U.S. economy. They are the number one employer of people, whether it's you're an entrepreneur and you're employing yourself to provide for your family, or whether you're paying others and giving them a livelihood to provide for their families. 4 out of every 10 could close permanently.
Yeah, and anecdotally, my family's business, they work with small business owners doing credit card processing, and close to 18% of those smaller businesses, we've seen the checking accounts gone, meaning that it looks like they've already folded. So I think we can recover from this longer term, but we need to recognize that we are seeing just a level of despair on our small business owners that we have never seen in our lifetimes. And if we don't begin this reopening process prudently, but also quickly, we're going to see this devastation spread. So I'm encouraged at some of the actions of some governors. I think that there is a recognition of how severe this problem is. And I say that the sooner the better in recognizing that.
Yeah, and I want to get to how we do recover economically in just a second, but I also want to make a point that many of the harshest lockdowns, the strictest lockdowns in states in our country are at the hands of Democratic governors. And some of the states that are opening up the earliest or had the least restrictive measures are Republicans. There is somewhat of an ideological split, at least at the state level, if not at the federal level. And I think this is very interesting because if you ask the question, who stands to gain from 40% of small businesses going out of business, the answer would be, well, big businesses and corporations who have enough saved that they can handle a hit without having closed down. And who stands to lose, of course, are the mom and pop shops. So I find it to be very interesting and very ironic, and something that the American people should ask their elected representatives, especially if their representatives are Democrats, how they can claim that they stand with the working man and stand with the little guy when their actions imposing these lockdowns are actively helping corporations and hurting individual small businesses.
Yeah, and I think that as legislators and governors hear from constituents, hear from business people, and hear from other people that don't necessarily own businesses that are workers, I think they are beginning to listen. If you look at Colorado, for instance, Colorado is beginning to open. That's actually happens to be a Democratic governor. But I think we need to realize, and our governors especially need to realize, this is not a one-size-fits-all policy when it comes to having proper actions to protect the public. When it comes to health, this is a regional issue. This is also can vary county by county. I mean, you see governors like in Kansas, where you have dozens of counties that are barely impacted at all by this, but they're subjected to the same draconian orders as the more metropolitan areas of the state. Something has gone wrong here. And I'm thankful that we see an increasing number of state legislators asking governors to reconsider these one-size-fits-all policies.
Yeah, and I think that's thanks to the people, to be honest. I think that's thanks to those who have lost their jobs saying, wait a second, you're not considering us when you are, making the count of what harm your policies are going to impose on us. So this is another statistic I want to bring up because when we talk about unemployment numbers, we talk often about those who lose their livelihoods. We talk about those who lose their life savings, their ability to provide for their families. You know, eventually they might lose their house. You know, it's devastating economically, but there's an indirect devastation that happens to our nation when we face economic trauma too. This is research from the National Bureau of Economic Research. They say as unemployment approaches 20%, we're probably close to that right now, each additional 1% rise in unemployment can result in a 3% spike in drug overdoses and a 1% increase in suicides. Joel, that's a lot of life.
Yes, and we've seen economic studies going back several decades that document this as well, that when you have this type of economic calamity, it does actually impact people's physical lives. When you talk about substance abuse, alcohol abuse, other drugs, suicides. And I think that if you have a prolonged period of this type of economic pain, you can see a significant number of deaths. This is wreaking not just health havoc with those that actually have the illness, but this is having a mental toll, a psychological toll, and it is impacting tens of millions of American families at this point. It's sad times indeed.
It's tragic. In the final year of the Great Depression, I would remind people, unemployment was 25%. 22 out of every 100,000 people in the U.S. died of suicide. That's the highest suicide rate that we have ever experienced in the United States, at an unemployment rate that we are getting shockingly close to during this great lockdown. So given that pretty dire painting of our economic devastation and what we are going to face in the future, how do we recover from this when so many people are closing down permanently?
Well, I think that we need to keep a focus on what we know works longer term. So we are going to see businesses gradually get to return to normal. We need to make sure that government is actually helping and not becoming a hindrance. You know, if you look at one of the things that Congress did about a month ago, that was enhancing unemployment benefits. I think that's well-intentioned. But we actually are giving those that are unemployed about $600 per week in federal benefits on top of state benefits, which means that in many cases, people are earning more on unemployment than they are earning on the job. This is probably wasn't the intended consequence, but what is going to happen is you're going to see people hesitate to actually go back to work. We actually have many stories now of CEOs and businesses talking about they're trying to reopen as the law permits, and they're having trouble even getting some of those employees to come back to work. We warned people about this. Congress went ahead anyway and passed this. This is something that Congress has to fix, because if we want to see a V-shaped recovery, a sharp recovery as possible, that means we need to make sure that the incentives are in place to encourage people to go back and to begin earning a living for themselves and their families.
And unfortunately, this wasn't a mistake. One might assume it was a mistake, but the Democratic senators specifically admitted that this was something that they did intentionally, this provision, giving more unemployment than more than 100% benefits compared to salary. They did it on purpose. They said they wanted to do it for a long time. And the reason for this is they want to make it sort of an unofficial minimum wage, meaning if people can make more on unemployment, then even if there's not a minimum wage law or the fight for 15 minimum wage law, it essentially coerces employers to raise that minimum wage. Otherwise, people are going to choose to sit on unemployment versus working.
Yeah, and it also tends to serve as almost a federal shutdown incentive measure. And once again, this is this tendency of those in D.C. to think that we can just have a top-down management style. This virus is infecting communities on vastly different levels. New York City is far different than Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up. And when you have the federal government orchestrating this $2,400 per month that pays people more than they're actually earning on the job, when that lasts for 4 months, in effect, you're pushing for a 4-month shutdown. And I think you're right that some people did intend for that to be the end result. And Congress has a responsibility to fix that, not just for the business owners, but for all of us that are participating in this economy.
Right. For everyone whose life is at risk because of the economic devastation that we are facing. Joel, thank you so much for your insight. I appreciate it.